Okay, welcome everybody to our keynote today in honor of LGBTQ plus Awareness Month. For those of you who have been joining us for these lectures throughout the year, we really appreciate you adapting with us as we learn to deal and move our things online that we usually do in person. We are planning to continue the series next year, so more to come on that for sure in the future. But this is actually our last keynote for the year, so we're very excited and we're very honored and thankful that Yosimar Reyes is able to join us today in this new alternative, now new normal format of Zoom. So what we're going to do today is more of like a webinar-based lecture. So momentarily, Yosimar will be sharing his screen and taking us through what his lecture would have been like in person, just via the internet. You still will have the opportunity to ask questions. We just ask that you hold those questions until the end of the lecture. So one more thing, I forgot to totally correctly introduce myself. So Jessica Murphy, I'm the coordinator for the Diversity and Inclusion Student Center, and I'm part of the University Diversity Office. And together with Kim Baker-Flowers, Liam Hawkyard, and Rocio Camarena, we bring a whole variety of events and try and help spread awareness on diversity and social justice issues. And this is just one of the ways in which we do that. So again, questions and answers will be at the end. I am going to read a brief bio on our speaker today, and then he will take over for the remainder of the time. Okay, so Yosimar Reyes is a nationally acclaimed poet and public speaker, born in Guerrero, Mexico, and raised in Eastside San Jose. Reyes explores the themes of migration and sexuality in his work. The Advocate named Reyes one of 13 LGBT Latinos changing the world, and Remezcla included Reyes on their list of the top 10 up-and-coming Latinx poets you need to know. His first collection of poetry for colored boys who speak softly was self-published after a collaboration with the legendary Carlos Santana. His work has also been published in various online journals and books, including Mariposas, an anthology of queer modern Latino poetry, Queer Aslan, Chicano Male Recollections of Consciousness and Coming Out, and the forthcoming Joto, an anthology of queer Chicano poetry. Reyes was featured in the documentary Second Verse, The Rebirth of Poetry. He is a Lambda Literary Fellow, as well as the recipient of the Undocu Poets Fellowship. Reyes previously served as an artist in residence at the media and cultural organization Define America. Reyes has toured and presented at university campuses across the United States. He is currently working on his one-man show, Prito, to premiere in the near future. Reyes holds a BA in creative writing from San Francisco State University. We are very lucky to have Reyes with us today, and we're very proud to feature you as our keynote for LGBTQ month. And the very not audible, but I'll start clapping, applause welcoming you to our virtual stage. So Yosimar, feel free to take it over.
Awesome. Thank you. Buenas tardes. Buenos tardes, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. I'm live in San Jose from my grandmother's bedroom where I've been quarantining. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. What I'll do right now, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen share so I can read some stuff, and then we'll get into the conversation. And then if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them at the end. Let's see. Okay. I think it's my visual. Okay, I'm testing out if you can see me correctly. I think the panelists are letting me know if everything is great. So, well, I'll start off with a poem, and then we'll get into the work. Hi, everybody. My name is Yosimar Reyes. I'm a poet. I'm a writer. I happen to be queer, and I happen to be undocumented, which is very in right now. I always like to plug that in. And so, most of my work deals with the intersections of immigration and sexuality. I try to really explore that I try to explore that as much as possible in the work. This next, I published a book titled "For Color Boys to Speak Softly." I was cleaning through my abuelita's bedroom, and then I found this copy, which is really funny. Now I was reading it, and I was cringing at some of these poems. But I'll start off with this one, "Saro lo que soy." It translates to what I am, and it goes like this. This is my nature. The truth in my heart, the breath in my lungs. Yo soy the one you fear, the one that got away, so lo único que se te fue. The one that grew up from your hate and still loves you. Yo soy el hijo que nunca será padre, el nieto que nunca será husband. I am the near and the far, of earth and sky, el sol y la luna. Soy everything that is in between, entre el hombre y la mujer. Soy el ser que por tu ignorancia no quieres reconocer. I am the one you define with hate, the one that doesn't fit your labels but manages to reclaim his name. Yo soy dualidad, y aunque digas que esta es la misma canción, el mismo poema, te repito que nosotros seguimos hablando de compasión. Yo soy de fuego y tierra, de mares que liberan, de muertes silenciosas. Yo soy la muerte que me deseas. I'm of destruction and reparations, of freedom in cages. I'm the bird that still sings praises, y con todas mis fuerzas te digo que tu odio me libera, porque más que espíritu enjaulado, yo soy el poder de la conciencia. Thank you. So when I started developing my writing when I was fairly young, I started developing it when I was 15, 16. And I think those times were kind of interesting in the way that I was developing as a young person, as a young queer person. I grew up in Eastside San Jose, and in my neighborhood was very much predominantly working class Mexicans. And so most of my neighborhood was apartment complex. Like I talk a lot about growing up in an apartment complex. And so with that being said, I felt like in being Latino and in being Mexican, oftentimes there's no word that honors queerness or that views queerness as a blessing. So for me, I've definitely understood that in English, I was able to maneuver it better. But in Espanol, all the words that to describe who I am or the identity that I embody have a negative connotation and have a negative thing. And I started questioning the coming out process for Latinos or the coming out process for people that are bilingual, simply because I felt like if I were to have a conversation about coming out, I wanted to change that narrative. I didn't want it to be like a confession, like, oh my God, I have something to tell you, and I don't know if you're gonna hate me because it's bad, right? I want it to be more like a celebration. I felt like I've gotten to the point that I view my queerness as a blessing, as a gift. So if God was like, do you want to be gay in the next life? I'll be like, yes, I'm down. It's something that's wonderful. It's amazing. I love it. So I started developing my voice in that sense, and I started really looking at ways that I can change that narrative of the identities I embody, and so that's why I kind of became. Let me see. Did I share my screen? Where's I'm trying to figure out my screen right now. Yeah, so I became very aware of that, and became very cognizant of the fact that I really wanted to give voice to that. And out of that, it's when I started developing the concept for my show, for Color Boys Who Speak Softly, because I felt that there was nothing that I felt that I could read or pick up, and I wanted to develop something for other boys that might feel like me. I'm an avid reader. I love reading. Reading is something that I enjoy. And so when I was fairly young, I started reading a lot of books, and I wanted to find books that kind of talked about my experience or explored my experience more. And I didn't find anything. The books that I found, I did find in the writings of James Baldwin, Alice Walker, and I felt like I can contribute to that. And so I read a poetry collection called For Color Girls, and that's what kind of propelled me forward to like, hey, I want to write a book like that. And this book was written from when I was 16. The last poem that I wrote was 19. So I'm about to be 32 in September. So clearly I'm not this kid anymore. But if anything, I am proud of this book because it's the writings from someone that was 16 to 19 that was queer, undocumented, and grew up in the hood and just trying to understand identity in that way. So this is the book that that I have now. I cringe because I'm like, oh my god, I read a lot of I used to write a lot of love poems that no longer are relevant. Okay, so we'll get into this conversation. I'll give you a little bit background about my development and how I kind of became able to develop my voice, and then I'll finish off with some other stuff. And then if you have questions, we can get into those. Um, One of the main topics that I talk a lot about in my work is about being undocumented. I think right now there's a lot of discourse, right? And for the last couple of years, we have discourse around what undocumented people are, what undocuqueer people are. It's a new term that we've kind of heard before. And I simply talk about this. A lot of people ask me, why do you always focus on being undocumented as opposed to your queerness, right? And I think for me, one of the biggest things that I really talk about, the difference between being undocumented and being queer in the scope of things, is that queerness is something that you embody. It's something that's in every fiber of your being. It's like, you notice your queerness. I always say, I notice my queerness is in my vocal cords, it's in my hair, it's how I move, it's how I dress. It's like, it's an essence of who I am. It's in my spirit. And as opposed to being undocumented, right? I think a lot of times I'm very careful about using undocumented as an identity marker, simply because I'm very aware that there's nothing undocumented about me, right? It's not in my it's not a physical thing. Being undocumented, I always remind people that it's a conditioning. It's kind of like poverty. It's something that you're conditioned to grow up into. So for me, it's very important to disconnect that and make that clear, because oftentimes if I do kind of internalize being undocumented, it starts affecting my psyche, and I start thinking of limitations as opposed to possibilities. And I think that's what my queerness resembles. My queerness is possibilities. It's endless possibilities. It's a universe, right? As opposed to undocumentedness is just restrictions, it's barriers, it's borders. And I want to really get into conditioning of getting rid of that. Um, this is me when I was in third grade. And I started this saying, I'm powerful and I've always known that. I grew up with my grandmother who recycled bottles and cans to make a living. And one of the things that she really instilled in us is the fact that as long as you have hands and your health, as long as you have the willingness to work, you can achieve anything. And I think one of the things that was that, right? Like me seeing my grandmother as an examples of hustling, of having different businesses, her entrepreneur skills, because she was undocumented and no one hired her, was something that I kind of started to pick up on. And then I started realizing, wow, I actually come from a community that's very resourceful, right? I grew up my block was all undocumented, but I started noticing how undocumented people started creating their own networks or ecosystems of survival. And me being keen to storytelling or being aware that I was consuming this, it kind of really impacted me, right? And now that I'm older, and I look at narratives regarding undocumented subjects, sometimes I feel a little bit insulted, because I feel that there's an agency that gets robbed from us as people. I think we're used to like the sob stories. We're used to like the stories of struggle, which is something very real, and I think it's something that we need to explore. But for me, it's also, what are the stories of success? I was having a lot of trouble with the word resilience. I think we like to overuse that word when it comes to marginalized communities. We use it with queer people all the time, of all the trauma we endure in a heteropatriarchal society. We like to tell people, oh, you're so resilient, right? And it reminds me of like when you're in third grade and the teacher gives you like a little gold star for doing your homework correct. I feel like resilience sometimes feels a little bit paternalistic and doesn't really celebrate and honor what it means to survive, right? And resilience means that you are surviving under a natural force. But I always tell people, as queer people, as brown people, as undocumented, as immigrants, there's nothing natural about hate. There's nothing natural about a system that wants to eradicate you. So I think that I've been doing a lot of more research, and then there's a lot of native scholars that use the word survivance, which is something that I really look I want to really explore more. Like, what does it mean to survive beyond, right? not just live, but thrive. And that's kind of what I've been trying to do with my work, hard and documented folks thriving besides the adversities that are placed against us. Um, so again, I grew up in a community of undocumented people. We created our own rules to keep afloat, kind of like an underground railroad of resources. I really found out that people knew what people who would hire you, people knew where to go to apply to work. There were people knew where to get resources. This picture is my grandma and my grandfather. I show this picture very proudly. If you really look at the picture, my grandma and my grandpa seem a lot older. They're elders at this point. And if you look at the cart, that cart is filled with glass bottles from recently different recyclables, right? This is very common in working class communities, in poor communities. We find that a lot of people recycle because you go leave these recyclables at a recycling center and you get a check for it. And my grandparents realized this very young, when they first got here into this country, that nobody would hire them, but they could collect recyclables and get money for them. And so they kind of develop a route and a system in which they were able to um, uh, you were able to kind of navigate this. And one of the interesting things that I find I've been using is that a lot of times, even us, right, as marginalized people, as people that might not have language, we don't really honor how intricate it is to build a system. My grandma would pick up the recyclables from different restaurants that knew her. And I'm like, you're building, I explained to her and I sat her down, like, realize how intricate that is. You're building an ecosystem for yourself in which you're kind of building your own, you have some skills of an entrepreneur, what you're doing. So I'm very proud to show that's how they raised me, and I'm proud that I come from that. Oftentimes I think in our imagination, if we were to see a picture like this, people would automatically assume like, oh, I feel bad for them. But my grandma, and at a very young age, really instilled in me like sympathy doesn't really do anything from nobody. If anything, when people feel sorry for you, it makes you feel like you're lesser than them. If anything, what you're trying to do is for people to identify with you. That's the difference. That's where empathy comes from, right? When you're able to feel someone's pain, not necessarily because you lived it, but because you know what that feels like. And as a storyteller, I realized that that's the power that we have in our own personal narratives. When you share your story with someone, when you're having coffee with your friend, or you're sharing an intimate part of you, who you are, what you're doing is creating a bond of connection. And that's what I try to do with the work, right? I don't want people to feel sorry for me. If anything, I want people to connect and be like, hey, I know what it's like to struggle. I know what it's like to have grandparents. I know what it's like to be an immigrant. I know what it's like to be looked down upon. And because of that, I connect with you. And I think if we create more places when we can be vulnerable with the things that we've experienced, then I think we have a power to change, or if anything, to evolve and not feel less alone. Um, Again, to reiterate that undocumented has never been my identity. I always look at it as a social tradition created by this government to keep me boxed in. And one of the other things that I realized when giving these talks is that a lot of people make feel like I'm trying to convince people to like undocumented people. But I always let people know that I'm from Eastside San Jose, and where I'm from, it's a basic rule. If you like me, I like you. And if you don't like me, I don't like you either, right? I think for me, it's more of that. I think I've moved beyond the acceptance level, but I just want to be kind of, I just don't want those false narratives of who we are to dominate, to dominate, and for people to think that we are these meek people that are just, either stealing resources, or the invisible enemy, as they call us. When I started coming out, either undocumented or even a queer person, as a queer people, I think one of the things that happens to us as queers too is that when you come out, there you're aware that coming out becomes a moment where you're making a decision. I think coming out to other people the hardest thing is coming out to yourself, realizing that you're queer, realizing that you embody this, but also making the conscious choice that when you vocalize this into the physical world, that what you're actually doing is you're making signing a contract where it means that you're going to have to justify your existence to every single person that might not want to understand your queerness. That you start with your parents, right? You're going to justify, well, I'm queer and I feel like I need to feel sorry for being this way, right? Because I'm disappointing you. Also, with being undocumented, I feel like when you become that, people feel like you have to justify for being. And I would get all these questions. How did you find out? You would get this all the time, right? How did you find out you were queer? How did you know? Or like, how did you know? Was the first person you told you were undocumented? And for me, like, I felt like those questions were one, invasive, and two, they were very limiting. It's very limiting in the answer that you get. And I think I've gotten to the point now that I don't want to justify, or I don't want to make you feel comfortable with my narrative. So it's just a matter of fact, like, I'm queer. If you like it, you like it, and if you don't, then that's fine too. And I think I've kind of learned how to navigate that with my family as well. And it's sad, it's heartbreaking that as queer people we have to navigate these things, but at the end of the day, I think our sanity and our own well-being needs to come first. And if somebody is choosing because of their beliefs to not be a part of moments that are special or moments that are sacred in your life, then that's the choice that they're making, right? And I think about this a lot, right? I think about how oftentimes when we're in the coming out process, our parents might not understand, but they're making the choice to miss out on, like, the first time we fall in love, the first time we navigate a relationship, the first time we go out with friends, right? You miss in that hetero patriarchal world, you're missing out on so much beauty and so much moments of magic, queer magic that happens. But again, I always strive, when people tell me, like, what was the process of you coming out to your parents? I always tell people that, listen, there's no process. You come out at your own time. And when you feel, for me, my process was like, I wanted to build myself so I have a strong spirit in case if I face rejection from someone that I love, that it wouldn't kill my spirit or I would feel sad or depressed, but I just had to keep moving on. And that's kind of how I've kind of managed everything. I try to build my spirit first, and when I'm ready to manifest it in the physical world, then I move on. Um, our stories, one of the things that I started noticing in storytelling, and I think that storytelling within queer narratives to undocumented narratives go hand in hand, right? I felt that our stories were weaponized to create a moral crisis within citizens. Instead of being asked to recount our pain, to better understand ourselves, we were chopped and edited as victims with no agency. I felt like we do not, I always feel like we do not need saving. I think within queer narratives, if we look at stories that are not told from a queer lens or by queer people, oftentimes the coming out story becomes very sobby, right? Like, if we look at story, like I think right now I'm grateful that we're living in a time where we're actually having language and challenging folks to kind of look at us in a different way. But I think for a while, for a period of time, with like shows like Gay as Folk, or like people, or shows like that, it was always about coming out. But I think now people are becoming more accustomed to seeing queer people live as three-dimensional characters, or like be messy, or queer people just do things that every average human being does, which I'm grateful for. And I think in the same regard as undocumented people, we would box our narratives into these sob stories. I kid you not, I've done so many interviews with people, and the first thing they ask me is like triggering questions to try to make me cry. And because it feels like if you cry, then you get more like, oh my God, I feel so bad, I want to share it, right? Which is great, but that becomes very voyeuristic, and it kind of becomes, they call it poverty porn, right? It becomes very much like, um are you really doing this for an impact, or are you doing this because you want to make yourself feel better? And this one, I always trace this out. Immigration is not a people problem. Oftentimes when we talk about immigrants in this country, we like to make it seem as it's a people problem, and we forget to look at the structures that we have in place as a country. What's very interesting right now, as we are connecting virtually amidst this pandemic and amidst the uncertainty of these times, right? That we're finding, and I think it's very important to know that at this moment, what we call essential workers are the people that oftentimes in greater conversations are the people that we're very dismissive about, right? Oftentimes in this country, we don't know how to honor labor. We do not know how to honor workers, people that work. Think about all the times that you've seen videos go viral where people are insulting people that work at a Subway, at a McDonald's, or working at cashiers at a Walmart, right? I think we've kind of conditioned to believe that the people that work these jobs because they didn't go to school or because they didn't want to pursue an education. I've heard so many a bunch of videos where people tell them, if you don't like your job, you should have gone to school so you can get better pay. And this is very interesting because I think if you're very aware of workers' rights, May 1st is tomorrow, and I know they're organizing a major boycott around workers that work at Amazon and Trader Joe's and Target, all these stores that are open, simply because we really need to be aware of honoring the labor of workers that we dismiss. And it's interesting that now those workers are the ones that are essential workers, right? And this moment, they're holding this country together. And I think where people are fighting for unions, or when people are kind of fighting for 15, which is like the living wage, right? And even 15 in San Jose or in Silicon Valley and Hayward, we are aware that the cost of living in the Bay Area is super high. So that even that's very low. But it's very being aware of the workers. So I try to remind people that instead of blaming people, we really need to look at the system that kind of bails out bankers or bails out huge industries. And it goes without saying, right? I don't know if you read the headline, but undocumented people pay more taxes than Jeff Bezos, who is a billionaire, right? So it's important to look at those structures. I always argue that more than ever now, what we do need, the solution to stop this is we need us to be the agents of our own narratives. If you're not undocumented, you don't have to be documented, but necessarily for me, as if you're undocumented, it's for you to own your story and say, hey, I want to format it in this way, and I want to say my story in this way. I don't want to cry. You making the conscious decision of what you choose to share. And as queer people, I think this is very important too. Oftentimes, what happens is that we don't think our lives are special or worth sharing. But you need to understand, I always tell queer people that what you need to understand is that you represent the story that you were looking for when you were 10, when you were 12, when you were 13. When you share your story, and when you're open about your troubles or the things that you've encountered, think about that. Think about when you were 12. Think about the teen. Think about when you were in middle school. For me, middle school was very hard. I was seventh, eighth grade, because I think for me I was coming to understanding that I was different, and I was so hungry to meet someone or to hear a story or to do that. And I think for us as queer people, I think that one of the things that happens is that we've never seen examples of successful queer people. We've never seen successful, I didn't grow up seeing examples of professionals, successful trans folks, or successful queer men, successful queer women. I didn't grow up seeing that. And I think for us, as young queers, we need that. We need those role models. We need those mentors. And I always tell people, like, if you're shy about sharing that, or you feel like you haven't lived anything special to share, just really think about that 12-year-old you have inside, of what you were hungry for. And I think that that'll be an indicator of the story, or the example that we should be. um this is another thing. Undocumented people are not monolithic, meaning that oftentimes I felt like that we were cut and edited to be the same story. But if you think about it as people, we're so dynamic. If we look at queer people too, we're so dynamic. We're not one thing. It's not just a coming out story. We're expansive. We have so many other things to share. We're not just like one trans story. We're not just one, you know, there's so much more. We laugh, we dance, we make love. There's so many things that we explore. And I think for me, that's what I wanted to share in my work. And then yeah, I think for me, it's like agency is very important in anything that you do. I think oftentimes, again, as marginalized people, it's very easy to get stuck into what the limitations that we have. But I think if you flip it and think of the power that the identities you embody, the gifts and the lessons that you've learned, what is one huge lesson that you learned from being queer? What is one huge lesson from being trans? What is a huge lesson that you learn from being a person of color? Those are lessons that, you know, if you really channel it, it becomes cultural wealth. It's cultural understanding. And I think I want to be able to honor that. And I always tell people, like, really think of that. What is the the blessings that you found in these trials and tribulations? And that's what informs the work. Again, undocumented and queer people, we do not need saving. We're good. We got each other's back. We've always had to. Um, and again, globally, I think with migrants, I think one of the things that I would like to remind people that we're global. It's not just within the context of the U.S. There's people globally, queer people, that are facing other things of other forms of silencing. So for us being conscious of that, that we're connected on a global scale and not just within the U.S., because it's also really easy to get caught up in how the U.S. kind of becomes this sole reason, becomes the only place that we think we exist in. Um, and again, this is one of the things that I like to remind people, if anything, to wake up every day to a country that vilifies you is an act of resilience. And this, again, I need to change it, but I'm going to change it to survivance, because again, resilience is something that I'm not really comfortable with, right? And I think as queer people, to wake up every day, you know, to a country that might misunderstand you, to wake up every day to a place that just, you know, either it's setting laws or it's just doing things to not make you feel celebrated, and to choose to participate, to choose to get cute, to choose to go dance, to pick up an outfit. I think it's something worth honoring, and for you to kind of celebrate and be like, yo, you got this. I'm so happy you're keeping moving forward. And that's, if anything, that's my message within my work. Like, listen, we don't have to continue justifying who we are, what we embody, our essence, our magic, right? We don't have to justify it. We can just step into our power, step into our light, and step into our joy and celebrate it. And I strongly believe that once you step into your power, your joy, you're unapologetic of who you are, of what you embody. I think this is the process, and when we start getting rid of shame. Shame is something that I think, for me, is something that I want to become an adult that's not ashamed of anything. Like, I'm not ashamed of growing up poor. I'm not ashamed of being queer. I'm not ashamed of being undocumented. I have no control over this. If anything, I choose to celebrate the lessons that this has taught me, and I choose to dance in the midst of that, because I was not supposed to make it this far. So that's a reflection. I leave that to you to reflect on. What are the things that you have come upon, and then you've made it through, and now you have a chance to celebrate that success. My reminder to folks is that we are powerful. And it's very interesting because in this picture, this picture was taken for Out 100, the Out magazine. It's a queer magazine, and every year they do the Out 100, in which they celebrate 100 notable figures during that year. And this time was celebrating undocumented queers. And if you look at this picture, you kind of see like the diversity in who we are. All these folks identify as queer. They also identify as undocumented. And one of the things when they asked us for this photo shoot, I really gave the feedback of like, listen, I don't want to, I want to be in a strong pose. I want to be in a commanding pose. And if you look at this picture is like, don't mess with us, so we're coming for you. So I'm really proud of that picture. And I think for me, that's my stance, right? In everything that I do, is like standing firm in my beliefs and standing firm in my power and not compromising that. And I understand that people might be scared or might be reluctant, but really I can't compromise that because I represent a greater demographic of people. Um, Again, if anything, undocumented joy, undocumented agency, and undocumented not necessarily. And this at this point for me, undocumented doesn't necessarily mean lack of papers or lack of citizenship status. Undocumented can mean those moments that we don't really honor, or those stories that we don't really tell because you feel like you're that's the other thing. I think we grow up believing that if we're happy about something, or we're proud about something, or we're successful, if we celebrate too much, then you might come off as bragging. But I don't think it's bragging. I think it's very important to also, the same way that we recount our traumas, to also recount the all our triumphs. I think really noting that it's very important. Let's see what else. My next slide. Oh, let's see. That went down. And I wanted to show you this slide. Um, and I developed an Undocky Joy campaign. Oh, Lord Jesus, it's the government. There you go. I developed an Undocky Joy campaign. This campaign was basically asking people, in what moments do you feel fully human? In what moments do you forget about what's happening in politics? In what moments do you forget about being queer? You forget about all these limitations, all the limitations that you might have around that. Really sit in that moment and tell me about it. And a lot of people wrote like, oh, I love canoeing, I love running, I love hiking. These are the things that give me a peace of mind. This is my picture of my grandmother. She's probably in the background cooking right now. But I always show her. And I think for me, growing up with elders was very important because if anything, I realized how fleeting life can be. And I think about that too. Right now, yes, I'm in a young stage of my life, but eventually I'm going to be an elder. And I think for me, really being conscious of what kind of adult and what kind of elder do I want to be. And in order for me to not cause any more harm in the world, or to not, of course, I'm going to do it because I'm learning. I'm a human being that's learning, but I'm also a person that's conscious that I don't want to replicate cycles of violence or of trauma. And in order for me to be that elder, to make it and become like I always like joke that I like Pocahontas. I knew I was gay when Pocahontas came out because I thought Grandma Willow, the little tree, I thought she was a bad bitch. I was like, oh my God, I want to be like her. So I think for me, I think about that, like what kind of elder do I want to be, and what kind of queer elder do I want to be for young folks that might need that representation. And for me, it's that really think of what kind of elder you want to be as you're developing as an adult and going through life. Of course, life is hard, but I think there's a lot of also things to celebrate. So that's Undocky Joy. You can find more of my work on my website, josimar.com, and I'm also on Instagram. You can find me on Instagram, Yosi Rey. Then I post a lot of materials. I have a book club. I'm always posting book recommendations if you need something to read. I also do a lot of lives with authors that have books out. And then I always give recommendations. This book is the one that we're going to be talking to the author tomorrow. She's queer as well and also undocumented. One of the first Harvard grads that was undocumented. It's called the book, The Undocumented Americans. So I'm really excited to talk to her tomorrow on live. But yeah, this is kind of my work. What I'll do is I'll end with a poem, and then we can get into some question or two, if that's cool. Again, I'll read from this book, For Colored Boys Who Speak Softly. I haven't reprinted any more copies, but some of this stuff is online. You tell me you don't like the city, that these buildings, this concrete numbs the senses, cages the spirit. And baby, your spirit was meant to be free. You, my love, were born to be revolutionary. Like the winds we felt sitting on top of the world, free like the tobacco you offer to blow blessings free. Like palabras sagradas que salen de tu boca y las rimas femeninas that you bust here on stage. You are my revolutionary, not a guerrero, but a healer, because in times of conflict, you mi rey, you heal. And more than body, I must agree with you that you are spirit. Because more than your flesh, I'm in love con el corazón que tienes. You are the reason why I love men with noble hearts, the reason why I don't mind sharing a bed with someone. For men like you, I will ride a million parts, get lost in Oakland and find your house beneath the brightest star. Mi vida, you come from tierra, with the spirits of those who failed to cross over Rome. You come from el desierto, but baby, we know you're not deserted. You got me, and together we are four spirits, like the four directions. You have the creator behind you. You're his creation, his masterpiece, and in the journey you are traveling, you have managed to leave your footprints in my heart. I carry your breath in my hair, your teachings in my two spirit. You are fluid, como los ríos que nuestra gente ha cruzado. You remind me that the only possessions we have in this world are our bodies and our voice, and the combination of the two must be used to honor the spirits of los antepasados. This life is a ritual, and in its sacredness, I'm so glad I'm able to hug you. You, my revolutionary, and as you make your transition back home into the arms of your mother and the lips of your father, I ask that you take this poem with you. I task that you take this memory with you, plant these en la tierra que te vio nacer, en esa tierra que ha sido bautizada con la sangre sagrada de nuestra gente, and I assure you, wherever you be, this love was sprout on you. Como el sol por las mañanas, this poem will shine on you. Now go to wherever home is, knowing that in San Jose, you leave a brown boy that has nothing but love and respect for you. In the meantime, I will stay here in this cage, in this shitty city, singing and singing till the system crumbles, till borders break, till the earth shakes and our people become awake. I will be here singing and singing to the day we're all free to return home. Gracias. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Yosimar. This was really, really amazing. I really love, I've seen you speak before. You did speak at our queer conference a few years back, and that was great. But I just love how you highlight the fact that we need, even if we don't feel like we're doing anything that's revolutionary, just our existence is an act of resistance and showing up. No matter how we choose to do that, the importance of doing that, especially as brown queer folks, and in your case, brown queer and undocumented, and just kind of being those people that kids like us didn't have when we were coming up, and just feels mundane. You could be just, doing what we do in higher ed, or, a bus driver, a teacher, whatever, but just seeing people doing stuff and knowing that they're queer is so important to help continue confidence, and to start getting folks to start understanding that, like, this is okay, you are okay, and this isn't a bad thing. And so I really appreciate you highlighting all that, and then the way that you intertwine that with the same strength and attitude about being undocumented too, because, like, it is really important for folks to know that, especially kids, like, being undocumented doesn't mean you're bad, just like being queer doesn't mean you're bad. And how do we, as folks who are carrying those narratives, move that forward? So I really appreciate you sharing that with us. So yeah, thank you so much. And now for everyone who's here, we have some time for questions and answers. So if you want to kind of chime in, we can start doing that. There's the Q&A section. You can also, if you are more comfortable, you can throw it into the chat and we can read your question out loud there. So I'll just open the floor to any questions that folks might have right now. One person who left, who's the co-chair of our LGBTQ affinity group, said she's sorry that she had to leave early, but she really enjoyed it. And she thanks you for sharing and teaching with us today, Yosimar.
Oh, thank you. That's so sweet. And I know people get shy too about questions. So if anything, thank you everybody for joining. And hopefully, I think my only thing, my main point that I'm trying to get across to people is, like what are the things, how do you honor your story when you tell it? And hopefully this bit has been that.
Well, okay, so Yosimar, what advice would you have for queer youth that are looking to connect with elders in the community?
That's you know, I think right now that's I think when I was younger, one of the things that I was going to the LGBT center, and I think that one of the impactful things that they did is they did an activity in which actually brought queer elders with young folks, and that was pretty amazing because it was the first time that I'm meeting like a 70 um year old like queer man. And I think th- for us, one of the things that we need to really be understanding of with queerness is the way that the AIDS epidemic kind of impacted our our access to role models, right? The way that and it's interesting that we're now living in this pandemic, and it's kind of like a lot of things are kind of remanifesting during that time. But for me, it's that I'm grateful that I have my grandma, and through her I've been able to connect to other abuelitas and other grandmas in the neighborhood, not necessarily queer, but in general, being aware of that. But I think for me, if you have access to your grandparents or have access to elders when you're family, I think really being able to even I think for me, like, I think as we need to think of our lives ourselves as historians and really documenting those stories. They said every time like an elder passes, you lose a library, right? So for me, really being conscious of that, documenting whatever they lived. And yes, you know, sometimes you got to be really patient with elders because they might be old school. But also be being forgiving in that way too. I think really reaching out to your own immediate family and the people that you might have around you, that you can have conversations with. Yeah.
Great. I'll see. We got something else in the chat here. What advice do you give our current undocumented students who are struggling to either finish their degrees or work to support their families?
This is a very, I think for me, I'd say I've lived that, right? I felt like I needed to choose like either work or help my family. I'm always very, even now, we were like, I'm a caretaker. I have an 85-year-old grandmother to take care of. I can't make in decisions. So like, oh, I'm gonna move states, or I can do that. One, I think really seeking out the support that's around you, really figure out the resources that you have around you. I think a lot of times us as undocumented people, we might be really scared to say, hey, I'm struggling or I need this, but I can assure you that there's people supporting. I think right now, a lot of people, we're up against a Supreme Court decision that's coming up in June, or any Monday, they're going to make this choice for the DACA program. But I think one, getting your renewal in. There's a lot of organizations that are doing renewals. If you are Mexican, the Mexican Council that funds your renewal. So just making sure you call them and get that money. And then there's a lot of nonprofits that are doing that. If you're in the Bay Area, the Mission Asset Fund, it's a great organization that right now is giving out zero interest loans to folks that are undocumented, and also giving aid to people that were not covered in the stimulus package that the president sent. So that's the Mission Asset Fund. Mission Asset Fund. You should definitely look into that.
Great. Okay, we have some more things coming through. Erica Diaz, would you please resubmit your question? It seems like some of it got cut off, so you can either put it in the Q&A section or you can drop it into the chat. And now I'm going to go to the next one. Oops. Oh, what did I do? Hold on. Let me get back into the chat. Okay. So Kathleen Reyes says, a fellow Reyes, thank you so much for presenting. I love your authenticity. I know you said you've always known you're powerful, no doubt there, but how do you think your outlook in life would have been different if you hadn't been raised by your abuela? Also, how can we be allies to not only the LGBTQ community, but our friends who are undocumented as well? Yes, there you go. That's
Yeah, yeah. My grandma was so encouraging. I think for me, being like how much what a hustler she was, inspired me. I was like, listen, I can't really be getting in trouble because last thing I need is to give my grandma like a heart attack. So I need to behave and be focused and do what I need to do to make sure that we're good. We already have it hard enough. Why am I going to complicate my life making decisions that are going to make it worse? So I was very keen to that. So I'm very grateful. And you know, I think that's the other thing that happens. It makes a difference to have encouraging parents or encouraging mentors. You can be in any situation. You can be poor, because I come from that, right? But I think having you being a mentor to someone, if you know someone is going through something, you reminding them of their power, it makes a huge difference. Just having one person believe in you makes a total difference. And I think if you work in an academic setting, or if you work in any place that you're working with youth or someone that's, and even in your immediate family, right? We have family members that might struggle from low self-esteem, but knowing that you have one person that's rooting for you, it makes total difference. And I'm an example of that, because I always had other, I'm the first one to set my limitations, and I always have other people like, no, think about this, you've done this. So I think that for queer people, from documented people, reminding them of everything they've already survived, then you're like, once one more thing that you can't do, really tap into that power makes a difference.
Great, thank you. Belen says, Yosimar, I was honored to see you present at San Francisco State a few years back. And when you read your poem that spoke about your life, really allowed me to reflect on my own life in many ways. I was also raised by my grandparents and honor what they have done for us. You're an inspiration, and I thank you. I'm a great fan of your work. I always advocate for your return to East Bay. Your story is powerful, and keep sharing it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
All right, and we got Kathleen. Okay, so from Erica, fear nowadays for many kids is coming out to their parents, especially in traditional Hispanic, Latinx homes. What advice can you give them? Yeah, that's it. Sorry.
Again, my advice is always, sometimes, where we feel like the pressure to come out or to explain things or to do things. But for me, really knowing you're really building your spirit, because I think for me, when I was 17, 16, and I felt like I have something I want to say, I have something I want to explain, I want to vocalize, I also knew that the time wasn't ready, because one, I felt like I'm going to make the choice when I am financially independent, when I don't need this, because it could for me, I was very aware that it was going to, honestly, to be honest with you, it was going to break my spirit if I heard my mother say something to me. I was in a very vulnerable state. And I think when we're in the process of coming out, we're in this kind of very tender place. And rejection can be like something that can be very, very hard. So for me, I always try to make sure, I would say, make sure that you're in a place that you feel balanced or you feel grounded, for whatever, and not to say that might happen, but for whatever happens out of that, just make sure that your spirit is strong enough, or that you have, and also that you have a strong support system, either talking to your friends or your mentors and saying, hey, I'm interested. I just to let you know, I'm about to have this conversation. So I just want to be able to say, can I count on you for if anything might happen? Really set yourself up for that, so you have like a safety net to land on. Because I can tell you, it could be a very difficult process, but everything at your own time. I always tell people, also people who are undocumented, were coming out. They're like, don't feel pressure that you have to do it. Wherever feels natural, and the calling is there, then you do it when you're ready.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice, Yosimar. We don't have any other questions in the chat. I can hang out for like another 10, 15 seconds. We could see if anyone has one more burning question or anything they would just like to share with Yosimar before we wrap this up. But, oh, there we go. Okay, so question from Rocio. What advice do you have for undocumented queer students who feel torn between advocating for queer rights and advocating for undocumented student rights?
I think we reached the point that we need to be advocating for everyone's rights, right? I think one of the things that I'm very aware of like now is I cannot say say that I'm an advocate for undocumented people without saying that I'm an advocate for Black Lives Matter. In the same regard, right now, in the midst of this pandemic, that we're seeing a rise in hate crimes targeting our Asian brothers and sisters, like I cannot sit idly and think that that does not impact me, because I'm aware that we're all connected and we're all neighbors. We all live in the same neighborhood, or we live in that. So for me, it's like doing that, right? And I think in spaces that you might feel not welcome, really understanding that you also have the power to create your own networks. And that's what we did with the undocuqueer bridging, where we bridge undocuqueer and undocumented, and we created our own place. But I think being aware that, like Audre Lorde said, right? Like nothing is a single issue, right? We need to all advocate collectively. And that's why for me, I stand for workers. I stand for people that, to get paid right. I stand for, those are the things that for me, I understand, because that's the lived experience that I had. So I'm like, you don't have to. And if that space doesn't feel welcome to you, then maybe it's time for you to find a different place where you can be your full self unapologetically.
That was great advice. And we just have a few accolades we'd like to share before we completely wrap up.
So sweet. Thank you. You're making my day.
From Kathleen Reyes, I just want to say thank you for taking time to speak with us today. You are truly inspirational, and I'm excited to see more of your work. Keep shining, sorry. And then from Kim Baker Flowers, thank you so much for being in community with us today, Yosimar. The spirit uplift of your message is appreciated.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, and we really appreciate you being here, Yosimar. Your message is very powerful and very poignant. And we're so thankful that we got to share some space with you, even if it was virtually. Hopefully, according to Belen, we're going to be bringing you back like every other month, I guess.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And hopefully you're taking this time to develop your story, keep writing, journaling. And if you need to take a break, it's all fine. You don't have to be as productive as possible, because I know we are always prone to that. But thank you so much. And thank you for joining me in the conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Yosimar. And we will see you all soon.
Gracias. Bye-bye.
Bye.